Every night the woman came to the same place in front of the small repair shop in a quiet town where nothing much ever happened, and the people were the same every day, and everything stayed silent and slow, like time had stopped long ago. She walked slowly, like her body was tired, but her eyes were always open and watching everything, like she was searching for something or someone. And when she reached the shop, she just sat down on the cold ground and lay there like it was her home. The shop owner was a quiet man who lived above his shop and liked silence more than talking, and spent his days fixing old radios and clocks and small machines that people had forgotten how to use or fix, and he never expected anything strange to happen. In his life, the first night he saw her, he thought maybe she was lost or had no home, but she did not ask for help or money, and she just looked at the stars above and fell asleep, right there on the cold concrete, like it was the most normal thing in the world. He watched her from his small window upstairs with a cup of tea in his hands and many thoughts in his mind, but he said nothing and did nothing, and just stood there trying to understand why she had chosen his shop. The next morning she was gone, and the place where she had slept was clean, like no one had ever been there, and he wondered if he had only dreamed her, but the security camera showed her clear and still and quiet like a ghost, without fear. Then she came again the next night, and the next, and many more, and he started leaving small things outside for her, like a blanket and some food and water, but most of the time she did not touch them and just kept lying there staring at the sky. She never spoke, and she never knocked, and she never cried, and she never smiled, and it was like she was made of stone, but her eyes were full of something deep, something sad, something lost, and it made him feel strange inside his chest, like something was waking up. One night he tried to talk to her and said a few words, but she did not even look at him and just kept lying still and quiet, and he stood there awkward and confused, and then walked back inside like nothing happened. But his heart was not calm. The town people started whispering, and some said she was crazy, and some said she was dangerous, and others said she was a spirit or a curse, but the man did not believe them and just kept watching her every night, trying to understand her silence. Then something strange happened one night when the moon was high and bright and the street was empty and silent, and he saw her leg was hurt with a deep cut and blood running down, but she did not cry or move. He was about to go help her when suddenly he saw the cut glowing with a blue light, and within seconds it closed like nothing ever happened, and her skin looked new, like the wound had never been there at all, and he felt a chill down his spine. That was not normal, that was not human, and he knew it, but he could not stop watching her now, because she was more than just a woman sleeping outside his shop. She was something else, something from somewhere far away, and he needed to know more. He started having strange dreams after that, dreams of stars exploding and dark skies and tall beings with light in their hands and strange sounds that made no sense, and he always woke up with the same feeling, like someone was calling him from far, far away. He checked the camera again and paused the footage where her face was close and clear, and he noticed a strange pattern under her skin near her neck, a small mark that glowed for a second, then disappeared like a secret only the camera could catch. The next day he tried to talk to her again and said she could come inside if she wanted, and that it was cold outside and he would not ask questions, but again she said nothing and just looked at him for one long moment and then turned her face away. But that night something different happened, something new, and it changed everything, because just before midnight someone knocked on the door, and it was not a soft knock, it was loud, like warning, like demand. He opened the door, and she was standing there with her eyes wide and her body shaking, and she looked straight into his eyes and said nothing, but behind her in the street there were two shadows with glowing shapes watching from the dark, with eyes like fire, and he knew in that moment everything was about to change forever. The door opened with a slow creak, like it was waking from a long sleep, and cold air rushed inside, carrying dust and fear and something else, something he had never felt before, something heavy like a storm waiting just outside the frame. She stood there again, the same woman with silver hair and sky-deep eyes, but tonight her face was different. Her hands were shaking and her breath was quick, like she had been running or hiding, and she was not alone this time. Behind her two shapes stood in the shadows, not moving, not blinking, just watching, like statues made of smoke and light, and their eyes were not eyes. They were bright like fire trapped in glass, and they did not speak or step forward. The man felt something strange in his chest, like his heart was Not his own, like it wanted to run and hide, but also wanted to step outside into the night and face whatever was coming like it already knew. This moment was meant to happen. She did not ask to come in. She only looked at him with a look that said, "Please," without saying anything at all, and he stepped aside slowly and let her walk past the door and into the small quiet shop where time felt older than it. Should the door close behind her with a soft sound like the end of a chapter, and the shadows outside did not move. They only faded slowly like mist in the morning sun, but the fear they brought stayed in the air, heavy and cold. She sat down on the old chair near the wall, her eyes tired, her clothes dusty, her voice still missing, and he stood in front of her, unsure what to say, unsure what to feel, unsure why he was not calling anyone or running away. Then she spoke for the first time, and her voice was soft like a memory from childhood, but strange too, like it was learning to shape the words as they came out, and she said only 2 words, "They know." He asked who they were and what they wanted, but she shook her head and placed her hand on her chest, where the glowing scar had once been, and said they were not from this world, not from this sky, and they would not stop until she was found. She told him her name was not easy to say in his language, but he could call her Lyra, and she was not here by choice. Her ship had broken, and she had crashed, and she was hiding because if they found her, they would take her and silence her forever. She said she had chosen his shop because it was old and quiet and full of forgotten things, and it made her feel safe like her home once did before it was taken and burned and left behind in a sky he would never see. He asked why she trusted him, why she didn't hide somewhere else, and she looked at him with those strange, deep eyes and said something that made the room feel even colder, "Because you are not like them." He did not understand, and she did not explain, not yet, but he could feel her words settle inside him like seeds ready to grow, and his mind was full of questions, but he knew now was not the time to ask them. All she stood and walked to the corner of the shop where an old radio sat broken and silent, and she touched it gently, and the machine flickered to life, without wires, without power, without reason, and it spoke in a voice no human had ever heard. He listened and felt something shift inside his mind, a small key turning in a quiet lock, and he remembered a photo hidden deep in a box upstairs, a photo of his father standing beside a strange metal shape that had no name and no story. She looked at him again and said the scar on her body was not just a wound, it was a tracker. It was calling them, and if they found her they would find him too, because now they were connected not just by space but by choice. He asked how to stop it, how to help her, and she said he had to remove the tracker from under her skin, but it would not be easy because it was alive, and it would fight, and it would hurt, and it might even kill her if done wrong. She said she trusted him not because he was kind, but because something inside him was old and hidden and full of light, like a spark from another time, another place, a part of a story that had started long before he was born. The lights in the shop flickered, the air grew heavy, and outside the wind began to rise, and she looked at the door with fear in her eyes and said they were close again, and he had to decide now if he was going to open the next door or close it forever. He looked at her, and he looked at the tools on his bench, and he looked at the door, and something inside him said this was no longer just about her, this was about him, about what he was and what he was meant to be. Asterisk. The sound came before the light, a strange pulse that moved through the floor, through the wires, through the walls, like it was looking for something hidden, something sleeping, something old. He woke up not because of noise, but because his dreams stopped suddenly, like someone had pulled them away like pages torn from a book, and he sat up in bed with sweat on his skin and the sound still ringing in his bones downstairs. The shop was alive, the old machines were buzzing, the tools were shaking the radio. Lyra had touched now, glowing, without power, without signal, without wires, and she was already there, standing in the middle of it all, like she had been waiting. Her eyes were wide, her hands close to her chest, and her voice low as she spoke words that made no sense but still felt heavy and sharp, and she said the signal was not from them, not from the hunters, it was older, it was meant for him. He asked how could that be? He was just a man with a small shop and a quiet life, and she looked at him with a face full of silence and said, "Again, you are not like them, and you never were, and the time to remember is close." He walked to the back room where dust covered old shelves and forgotten things, and in the corner was a box wrapped in cloth, thick with years and untouched, and he opened it with hands that shook and breath that felt too slow. Inside was a photo, black and white, faded with age, showing his father younger and proud, standing next to a strange shape, something not human, something not of earth, and behind him the same radio now glowing. In the other room there was also a piece of paper folded many times, and when he opened it he saw symbols not from any language he had ever seen, and yet they felt familiar, like he had seen them once long ago in a place not here, not now. He showed Lyra the paper, and she held it with care, and her eyes softened, and her voice broke a little as she said, "This is not just language. This is memory, and it belongs to your blood, to your family, to the ones who came before." She asked him to sit, and she sat across from him and placed her hand gently on his forehead and closed her eyes, and suddenly his mind was not in the room anymore. It was somewhere else, somewhere full of stars and sound and war. He saw giant ships like floating cities tearing through space, chasing small silver crafts that moved like birds. And one of them was hit and burning and falling, and inside was a figure just like her and just like him. He saw Earth not from maps, not from books, but from far away, floating alone in silence, waiting like a beacon, and the ship crashed and time passed. And people forgot, but the signal never stopped calling for something lost. When he opened his eyes, he was back in his shop, and she was there. But now she looked different, tired, older, softer, and she said the message was not just for her, it was for him, and he had a choice now. He could help her remove the tracker from her body, but once it was gone, it would send a last signal, and that signal would bring everything that was hunting her to their door, and then there would be no more hiding. He looked at her, and then at the tools on his bench, and he felt fear and fire and something deep that had no name. And he said yes with a voice that did not sound like his own, and she nodded once, slow and sure. She lay down on the table and closed her eyes, and he picked up the old scalpel with shaking fingers, and as he cut through the skin, a light burst out, not red, not blue, but something in between, and the tracker moved like it was alive. It tried to fight him. It sent sharp pulses through her body, but she did not scream. She only held the edge of the table and whispered words in her own language, and he kept going until it came loose and dropped onto the floor with a sound like glass breaking underwater the moment it hit the ground. Every machine in the shop shut down, the lights flickered, the air grew still, and Lyra's body stopped moving, her breath gone, her chest quiet, her hand slipping from the table like a leaf in the wind. He froze. Then the radio spoke again, but this time it said his name, and the voice was not hers, it was his father. Asterisk. The town woke up as if nothing had happened, as if no light had screamed through the clouds last night, as if no girl had bled silver on a shop table, and no machines had spoken. In the voice of a dead man, shutters opened, slow dogs barked, milk spilled, newspapers landed on doorsteps with boring headlines, and no one noticed the strange black shape above the hills that hovered without sound and watched without blinking inside the shop. The man sat on the floor with the tracker still glowing beside him, and Lyra still not breathing, and the voice of his father still echoing in the broken radio with words that made no sense and yet felt like home. "You are more than you remember." He touched her hand, and it was warm, but she was still. She was not gone, but not awake, like she was somewhere between moments, floating in a place where time had no shape and silence had weight. He looked at the tracker and saw it was pulsing slow and steady like a heart, like a countdown, and he picked it up, and the moment he did, the air around him rippled like heat from a fire, and his skin felt cold, and his eyes saw something that was not there. He was standing in a place that looked like the shop, but older, deeper, filled with wires that moved like roots and machines that hummed like they were breathing, and in front of him was a man with his face, but not his eyes. The man spoke without moving his mouth and said, "The blood in your veins is not all from here, and your hands were made for more than repair, and if you want to protect her, you must stop being afraid of who you are." Then the vision was gone, and the shop was normal again, but his hands were not the same. They were glowing faint gold, and when he touched the metal shelf nearby, it bent without effort, like clay, like paper, like it was waiting for him. Lyra gasped, and her eyes opened, and she looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time, and she whispered one word, not in English, but somehow he knew what it meant. "Awaken." Before he could speak, the radio sparked again, and a new voice came through, harsh, sharp, like glass breaking inside his ears, and it said, "Your location is confirmed. Prepare for extraction." And then the radio burned from the inside and turned black. She sat up fast and said, "We have to go now. They are coming. They do not knock, they destroy, and if we stay, They will burn everything until nothing is left. He asked where to go, and she said, follow the line, the sky has already marked it. And when they stepped outside, the air felt wrong, the clouds were spinning without moving, the birds were silent, the street was too empty. They walked fast through the alley behind the bakery and past the old school and into the woods where the trees still remembered the stars and the wind carried no sound, only the memory of something big coming closer behind them. The town kept breathing like it always had, and no one saw the three dark shapes fall from the sky like stones wrapped in lightning, and no one heard the first house vanish in a blink of white. In the forest she led him to a cave hidden behind roots and stone, and inside were carvings not human, not recent, not random, and the light from his hands glowed brighter near the wall, like the place was waiting for him to return. She said, this cave is old, older than the town, older than the country, older than memory. And once it was used as a door between skies, and now it must become one again, but only if you open it with what is inside you. He did not know how, but he stepped forward and placed his hand on the stone, and the cave shifted like it was breathing, and light poured from the walls and her body and his, and for a second everything felt still and endless. Then the sound came, not a roar, not a scream, not a voice, a signal from far above, from the ones who had been searching and now had found. She looked at him and said, they are close, we do not have much time, and if you want to live you must stop being who you were and start becoming who you are. And outside the trees bent as three black shapes landed, and the earth began to tremble like it knew what was coming and had no words for it. Asterisk. The stone did not open like a door. It melted like memory, it peeled back like time folding in on itself. And when they stepped inside, it was not a cave anymore, it was a place between places, a room that was not built but grown, a breath held by the earth for too long. The air was warm, but not heavy, the walls pulsed with soft light like veins carrying stars instead of blood, and the silence was full of voices, whispers not in words but in feelings, like the cave was alive and it had been waiting for him. He walked slowly, his steps light but sure, and every time his hand brushed the wall, the light grew stronger. It followed him like it knew who he was. Even if he did not, Lyra stayed behind for a moment, her eyes closed, her lips moving with no sound, like she was praying or remembering a song from a place that no longer existed. He reached the center of the chamber, and there it stood, a stone like a heart floating in the air, turning slowly, covered in symbols he had never learned but somehow understood. He stepped closer, and the moment his shadow touched the floating stone, the chamber changed, the walls stretched, the floor bent. The cave became a sky and stars poured in from every corner. Suddenly he was standing on nothing, surrounded by everything, and a voice filled the air, not loud, but deep like thunder beneath the ocean. You were not born to fix broken things. You were born to remember what should never have been forgotten. He saw visions now, flashes, a giant ship falling through the clouds, his father standing beside it, not afraid, but smiling, holding something small, something wrapped in gold light. He saw men in suits digging in silence, removing parts covering the truth, hiding what they found in files marked never speak. He saw Lyra, not lost, not hunted, but chosen, sent here not to escape, but to find him, and he saw himself not as he was, but as something more, something awake. Then the stars faded, the chamber returned, and the floating stone split open like an egg, and inside was not metal, not wires, but a small, clear crystal pulsing like a heartbeat. He took it, and the moment he touched it, his mind filled with voices, memories not his, but part of him. Now Lyra came beside him, her eyes wide, her breath still. She whispered, this is your key to the truth, to the door to me. He asked what she meant. She looked at him with quiet sadness and said, the world you know was never whole, pieces were taken, hidden, buried in blood and lies. You are the map, you are the signal, and now that you've touched the core, they know exactly where you are. He looked down at the crystal, still glowing in his hand, still pulsing like it was alive, and the cave began to tremble far above. The black shapes in the sky opened wide like claws, like teeth, and the town below began to forget again. Names vanished from signs, voices faded from homes, the streets turned still, like the world was pressing a reset button. And inside the cave he turned to Lyra and asked, why me? And she said, because long ago your people made a promise to protect what fell from the stars, and now that promise is breaking. You are the last chance to hold it together. Outside the first strike hit, The ground, the earth shooken, the cave whispered his name not. The one he knew, but the one written in the stars, asterisk, he did not speak the name, but the cave knew it, the walls breathed it. The light repeated it again and again, a name not spoken on earth, not written in books, a name that carried the weight of a broken promise and the hope of a dying star. He fell to his knees, not from pain, not from fear, but from something deeper. Like his bones had heard the truth before his mind could catch it. Like his heart had been waiting for this moment since before it started. Beating Lyra stood beside him, her eyes full of sorrow, not because of what was coming, but because of what had already come. Too many times, too many worlds, too many lives lost for the same reason. He asked her what the name meant. She looked at him, as if the answer would hurt, and said, "It means he who was left behind and must choose whether to return or rebuild." He stood slowly, his body shaking but his eyes clear, and the crystal in his hand burned bright, like it knew the path even if he didn't then. She showed him the truth not with words but with memory. She touched his forehead, and the cave around them disappeared, replaced by a field of light floating cities, ancient machines, and people not human, not alien, but something in between. He saw a council arguing, fearing, hiding a truth one of their own had crashed on Earth, and left behind something powerful, something dangerous, something alive. That something was him. He had not just inherited the blood, he had carried the seed, a piece of old code, lost DNA, a living key passed through generations wrapped in human skin. He asked why they hid him, why his father never told him, why the world was allowed to forget, and Lyra said, because if they had known what you were, they would have killed you, or worse, used you. She told him the crystal in his hand was the final piece, the last spark that could wake the gate, the real gate, the one that linked Earth to the lost network of worlds once united long ago, before silence, before war, before fear. But to open it, a price must be paid, one life for another, one memory for many, one truth for one world. He looked at her and knew what she meant. She was the key, but only if she gave everything, her memories, her body, her light. He said, "No, there must be another way." She smiled sadly and said, "There is, but it means you give your life instead of mine." He laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was too much, too fast, too deep, and still something inside him said, "Yes, this is what you were made." For then the ground above shook, not gently, but like the sky had cracked in half, and the shadows came pouring in, not walking, not flying, but falling like smoke wrapped in metal. He turned to her, and she looked at him with eyes that had seen 1,000 endings, and said, "Choose now." He closed his eyes, held the crystal, felt the pulse, and said the name the cave had whispered, the name he never chose. And the light exploded from his chest. The cave lit up, the sky opened, and every machine in the enemy's hands stopped moving. But he did not fall, he did not burn, he did not vanish. He stood tall, alive, awake, changed. Lyra stepped forward, touched his hand, and said, "You found the third way, the forgotten way. You bent the cost." He asked how. She said, "Because you gave your fear instead of your life." And the cave smiled, asterisk. The stars blinked out one by one, not because the sky was dark, but because the door was opening, and light that did not belong to Earth poured in like a tide, with no sound, no warning, no way back. He stood at the edge of the cave, not alone, not afraid, with Lyra by his side, and a name in his chest that no longer felt strange. A name the stars once knew, a name that now belonged to him again. Behind them, the cave began to close, its light sinking into the stone, its voice now quiet, its duty done. It would sleep again until it was needed by another world, another lost child. Above them, the sky cracked open, not broken, not torn, but revealed like it had always been, more than clouds and stars. And Earth was never just a planet, but a forgotten bridge, buried in silence, wrapped in dust. Machines floated down, not from the enemy, but from the others, the ones who had watched from far away, waiting, hoping that the signal would return, that someone would answer, that someone would survive. He could hear them now, not in words, but in meaning, in pulses that touched the mind and asked without asking, "Are you ready?" He turned to Lyra, her face calm, her hands steady, her eyes no longer hiding. She was not just a visitor, she was a guide, and her journey had not ended, only changed. She looked at him and said, "You do not belong to Earth, only you never did, but what you choose now will shape both this world and the ones that follow." He saw the town in the distance, still sleeping, still small, still pretending nothing had changed. Even as the sky rewrote itself above, I thought of the old shop, the broken radios, the clocks that ticked even when no one listened. He thought of his father, And the voice in the static, the warnings, the love, the sacrifice he thought of his own hands, once meant to fix things, now meant to open doors. He asked if he would return. Lyra said, not as you were, but maybe when the time is right, when this world is ready to remember. He nodded, stepped forward, the crystal still glowing in his hand, and as he crossed the edge, the ground beneath him vanished, replaced by stars, by roads made of light, by silence that sang behind him. The door closed, not locked, just waiting, and the shop remained, dust on the counter, tools in their place. A single light in the window that never went out. People said the man disappeared one night, gone without a word, but some swore they still saw him, sometimes in dreams, in flashes of reflection in radios that turned on by themselves, and every year on the same night, the stars above the town would move just a little differently, like they were watching, like they remembered, like they were waiting for the next door to open.